Lara's fingers hovered over her keyboard, the gentle tap of rain against her window a metronome to her thoughts. She'd been editing the same paragraph for 20 minutes, her concentration fracturing with each flash of lightning. The words on her screen, a historical thriller about a woman who discovers her neighbor isn't who he claims to be, had started to blur together in the dim light of her desk lamp. There was something about rainy Thursday nights that made the world feel smaller, as if her third-floor apartment had detached itself from the building and was floating somewhere between reality and dream. She reached for her mug of green tea, now cold, and that's when she saw him. A man stood on the sidewalk across from her building, partially obscured by the wavering cone of the street lamp. He wasn't doing anything particularly suspicious, not checking his phone, not smoking, not even shifting his weight from one foot to another, just standing, still, watching. Rain plastered his dark coat to his frame, but he seemed unbothered by the downpour. What struck Lara as odd wasn't his presence. People were often out, even at 11:30 p.m., but his stillness, and the fact that he appeared to be looking directly at her window. The street lamp flickered, a momentary surge in the grid, and when the light stabilized, the man was gone. Lara blinked, scanning the empty sidewalk. Had she imagined him? She'd been working for nearly 6 hours straight, her eyes strained from the screen. Perhaps it was just exhaustion, or a trick of the rain-blurred glass. She returned to her manuscript, dismissing the fleeting unease. The protagonist in the novel was becoming paranoid about her neighbor, and Lara smiled at the irony. Fiction bleeding into reality, or her mind simply looking for connections. She made a note to tell her client how immersive the manuscript had become. The next night brought more rain. Seattle in October was reliably wet, but this particular pattern of steady, whispering rainfall felt personal somehow, as if it had been designed specifically as soundtrack to her nocturnal work habits. Lara had positioned herself at her desk again, this time with a fresh mug of tea and a resolve to finish the chapter she was editing. At precisely 11:28 p.m., she looked up. Without meaning to, without any external prompt, her eyes lifted from the screen and fixed on the window. He was there again. Same spot, same stillness, same dark coat. This time she was certain. He was looking directly at her. Not at the building, not at a random window. At her. The logical part of her brain offered explanations. A neighbor waiting for someone. A rideshare driver whose app had glitched. A smoker who'd forgotten his lighter. But another part of her brain, the primordial part that recognized patterns and detected threats, whispered that something was off. The street lamp's glow created a halo around him, but his face remained shadowed. Lara stood up, moving closer to the window, and the man remained perfectly still. No reaction to her movement. She raised her hand, a hesitant wave that wasn't quite a wave, more of a test. Nothing. Then, as if responding to an invisible cue, he took 3 steps backward into the darkness beyond the street lamp's reach, and vanished. Lara's heart quickened. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, straining to see into the shadows, where he'd disappeared. Nothing moved except the rain, which had intensified, drumming against the sidewalk. "You're being ridiculous," she muttered to herself, pulling away from the window and drawing the curtains closed. The protagonist in her manuscript was starting to photograph her neighbor's comings and goings, documenting patterns in a notebook. "That's fiction, not a suggestion," she said aloud, returning to her desk. But 3 nights later, when the rain returned after a brief hiatus of clear weather, so did the man. And Lara, despite herself, began a note in her phone. Thursday, Oct 15th. Rain, man appears 11:30 p.m., gone by 11:33 p.m. Friday, Oct 16. Rain, man appears 11:28 p.m., gone by 11:32 p.m. Monday, J-Oct 19. Rain, man appears 11:35 p.m., gone by 11:40 p.m. She noticed it wasn't just the rain that predicted his appearance. It was her. He only showed up on nights when she was working late at her desk. If she was in the kitchen or the bedroom, no sign of him. The correlation was unsettling. On Tuesday, the forecast called for clear skies, but a sudden system moved in around 10 p.m., bringing a light drizzle. Lara found herself sitting at her desk, not even pretending to work, just watching the street below. No man appeared. At 11:45 p.m. she exhaled, feeling both relieved and strangely disappointed. She mentioned it to Mr. DeLuca the next morning. The retired engineer lived in the apartment above hers and often shared coffee with her in the building's small communal garden. "A man watching the building?" he repeated, frowning. "At night, in the rain." "I know how it sounds," Lara said, embarrassed now that she was saying it aloud in daylight. "Like I'm seeing things." Mr. DeLuca shrugged. "Maybe not. I think I might have seen someone a couple of times when I was taking out my recycling." "Tall fellow, dark coat?" Lara nodded eagerly, relieved. "Yes, that's him. So I'm not imagining it." "Well, my eyes aren't what they used to be," he admitted, tapping his thick glasses. "Could have been anyone. Might have been that new tenant from the first floor. What's his name?" Martin. "Mason," Lara corrected. "But this man wasn't coming from our building. He was just watching." Mr. DeLuca looked at her for a long moment. "You know, when my wife was still alive, she used to say the mind plays tricks when you're alone too much. I'd be careful about letting your imagination run away with you, especially when you work with all those thriller manuscripts." Lara forced a smile. "You're probably right." But that night, when the rain came again, she was prepared. She positioned herself at the window with her phone camera ready. The street was empty at first, glistening under the street lamp. Then, at 11:31 p.m., he appeared. She didn't know how he got there. One moment the sidewalk was vacant. The next, he was standing in his usual spot. She took 3 photos in quick succession, the shutter sound muted on her phone. When she checked the images, her stomach dropped. The first showed only the empty sidewalk. The second captured the street lamp, the rain, but no man. The third made her nearly drop her phone. Where the man should have been standing was a blurry outline, not of a man, but what looked disturbingly like her own silhouette, standing outside, looking up at her window. Lara zoomed in, hands trembling. The figure was indistinct, but there was something undeniably familiar about the shape, the height, the posture, even what seemed to be the outline of her oversized cardigan. She looked down at herself, wearing that exact cardigan, then back, at the photo. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible." She took more photos, rapid fire, 20 or 30 in sequence. The man remained on the sidewalk, unmoving throughout. But when she reviewed the images, he appeared in none of them. Instead, in about half the photos, that same blurry figure, herself, stood on the sidewalk. In the others, there was nothing but empty pavement and falling rain. Doubt began to creep in, cold and insidious. Was she projecting something? Was her tired mind playing tricks? Or was something wrong with her perception? Something medical, perhaps? Lara remembered her mother's gradual cognitive decline before her diagnosis. Had it started with seeing things that weren't there? She deleted the photos, suddenly afraid of what they suggested, and pulled the curtains shut. That night she dreamed of standing in the rain, looking up at her own window, watching herself work at her desk. The next morning, Lara rearranged her apartment. She moved her desk away from the window and positioned an armchair in its place. That evening, she sat in the chair with a small digital voice recorder, a tool she occasionally used for work when interviewing authors. The rain began around 9 p.m., a gentle tapping against the glass. She turned on the recorder and placed it on the windowsill, then settled in to wait. At 11:30 p.m., she looked out. The man was there, motionless, staring up. Lara fought the impulse to wave or open the window and call out. Instead, she sat very still, watching him watch her. "Who are you?" she whispered. At 11:35 p.m., he backed away and disappeared. Lara continued recording until morning, then transferred the audio file to her laptop. She fast-forwarded through hours of ambient noise, rain, distant traffic, the occasional creak of the building settling. At 2:43 a.m. she heard it, the unmistakable sound of a key in her apartment door, the lock turning, the hinges creaking slightly as the door opened. Then silence. Lara paused the playback, her heart hammering. She rewound and listened again. The sound was clear, distinct. She would have sworn on anything that someone had entered her apartment at 2:43 a.m., but she'd been awake in the chair until nearly 3 a.m. reading and had heard nothing. The chain had been on the door. No one could have entered. She listened to the rest of the recording. No footsteps, no other sounds of movement. Just the ambient noise of the apartment, and underneath it all, a sound she initially mistook for the building's heating system. Slow, measured breathing, too slow for normal respiration. She compared it to her own breath, counting the seconds between inhalations. The breathing on the recording was half the rate of her own, as if someone had been there in a state of deep meditation or something else. Over the next week, Lara recorded each night. The man appeared whenever it rained, always at the same time, always watching. The recordings captured the sound of her door unlocking 5 more times, always around 2:40 a.m., always, followed by that slow, unnatural breathing, but never any footsteps or other movements. "I think I need to stay somewhere else for a while," Lara told her sister on the phone. "Maybe I'm working too hard." "You can come stay with us," her sister offered immediately. "The guest room's all yours." But the thought of leaving her apartment, of letting whoever or whatever this was continue without her knowledge, felt worse than staying. Instead, she asked Mr. DeLuca if he would stay over one night when rain was forecast. "You really think someone's coming into your apartment?" he asked, concerned. "I don't know," Lara admitted. I'd feel better if I wasn't alone." Mr. DeLuca agreed, bringing his crossword puzzles and a thermos of decaf coffee. They waited together in the living room, the rain pattering against the windows. 11:30 came and went. No man appeared on the sidewalk. "See?" Mr. DeLuca said kindly. "Your mind was just playing tricks." They stayed up until just after midnight before Mr. DeLuca settled on the couch and Lara went to her bedroom. The recording device remained on the windowsill, running. In the morning, the rain had stopped and sunlight streamed through the windows. Mr. DeLuca was already awake, making toast in the kitchen. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Better than I have in weeks," Lara admitted. After he left, she checked the apartment thoroughly. Everything was in its place. No signs of intrusion. She was about to stop the recording when she noticed something by the front door. A small puddle of water on the hardwood floor, as if someone had walked in soaking wet and stood there, dripping. She checked the ceiling. No leak. The windows were all closed. Mr. DeLuca had come over before the rain started and his shoes had been dry. With shaking hands, she transferred the audio recording to her laptop and listened. No sound of the door unlocking this time. No footsteps. But the breathing was there, slow, rhythmic, exactly like her own breath, but stretched out, unnaturally elongated. The sound made her skin crawl. That afternoon, Lara moved the armchair away from the window. She packed away the recording device. When it rained that night, she closed all the curtains and turned on every light in the apartment. She put on music, loud enough to drown out any sounds from outside or within the apartment itself. And she tried very hard not to look out the window, even when she felt with absolute certainty that someone was standing on the sidewalk below, looking up. Even when she felt with growing dread that there might be a second presence inside the apartment with her, breathing very slowly in the shadows beyond the light. The dinner guest, Daniel Matthews, stood at his kitchen window watching the storm intensify. The rain fell in heavy sheets, turning his backyard into a dark, glistening canvas. Wind lashed the maple trees that lined his property, their branches, scratching against the siding like fingernails. It was the kind of night that made him grateful for walls and a roof, for the simple security of being indoors. But tonight, that security felt hollow. This was his 5th weekend alone since the divorce. His children, Emma and Noah, were with Catherine at her parents' lake house, probably playing board games and drinking hot chocolate, oblivious to the storm. The thought created a painful hollowness in his chest that he couldn't seem to fill, no matter how many Netflix shows he queued up or how many beers he drank. The power flickered once, twice, then died completely. Daniel sighed as darkness enveloped the house. He'd been expecting this. The weather forecast had warned of high winds and possible outages. He moved through the familiar space with his phone's flashlight, retrieving candles from the drawer by the refrigerator, placing them strategically around the kitchen and living room. The ritual was oddly comforting, a small problem he could actually solve. With the candles lit, the house took on a warm amber glow that softened its emptiness. Daniel uncorked a bottle of Cabernet, one he'd been saving for a special occasion that never materialized during his marriage, and poured himself a generous glass. He spooned leftover curry into a bowl and carried his improvised dinner to the couch. The rain's percussion against the roof filled the silence as he ate, occasionally punctuated by thunder that seemed to roll directly overhead. Daniel had never noticed how loud the house was during storms when he'd lived here with his family. The children's voices, the television, Catherine's phone calls, they had all masked these sounds, buried them beneath layers of domestic noise. Now, with nothing to distract him, every creak and groan of the settling house commanded his attention. At 9:32 p.m., he checked his watch in the candlelight. There was a knock at the front door. 3 firm raps that cut through the storm's ambient roar. Daniel froze, fork halfway to his mouth. He wasn't expecting anyone, and his house sat at the end of a long driveway, separated from the nearest neighbor by half an acre of trees. Who would be out in this weather? Who would even know he was home? The knock came again, more insistent this time. He set his bowl down and moved cautiously to the door. Through the peephole, distorted by the fisheye lens and rain-streaked glass, he could make out a figure on his porch, slight, feminine, hunched against the wind. Daniel hesitated, his hand on the deadbolt. In the 8 years he'd lived in this house, no stranger had ever appeared unannounced after dark, but the thought of leaving someone out in the storm overrode his caution. He unlocked the door and opened it partway, keeping the chain attached. A woman stood on his porch, completely drenched. Mid-30s, shoulder-length dark hair plastered to her face, wearing a navy blue raincoat that had clearly surrendered to the deluge. She clutched a small travel bag to her chest. Water streamed from her clothes, pooling at her feet. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I think I got the address wrong. I'm looking for my Airbnb." Daniel blinked, caught off guard by the mundane nature of her problem. Airbnb out here? It was supposed to be a cabin rental. 47 Pinecrest Road? There was an expectant quality to her voice, as if she already knew she had the wrong address, but hoped to be wrong about being wrong. "This is 47 Oak Ridge Lane," Daniel replied. "Pinecrest is about 4 miles east of here." The woman's shoulders slumped. In the dim porch light, Daniel could see now that she was pale, with dark circles under her eyes that might have been exhaustion, makeup, or both. "My phone's dead," she explained, "and my car's GPS led me here before it died too. This storm..." She gestured vaguely at the darkness behind her. "Do you want to use my phone to call the host?" Daniel offered, unlatching the chain. "I don't have the number memorized, it's in my email." She shifted her weight, glancing back at the downpour. "Could I possibly call a cab? I can wait on the porch until it comes." A flash of lightning illuminated the yard, followed immediately by a crack of thunder that seemed to shake the foundation of the house. The rain impossibly intensified. "You should come in," Daniel heard himself say. "No cab is going to make it out here anytime soon in this weather. You can dry off, charge your phone if you have a cable." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you, I didn't know what I was going to do." She stepped inside, careful not to drip too much water on his entryway tiles. Daniel closed the door against the wind, suddenly aware of what he'd just done. Invited a complete stranger into his home during a power outage. It was either an act of basic human decency or the beginning of a horror movie. He wasn't sure which. "I'm Daniel," he said, realizing he should have introduced himself before inviting her in. "Alice," she replied with a small smile. "I really appreciate this." "The power's out," Daniel explained, gesturing to the candles. "But I can get you a towel, and I think I have a phone charger that might work for you." "That would be wonderful." He fetched a clean towel from the hallway closet and handed it to her. She set her travel bag down by the door and dabbed at her face and hair, not making much progress against her drenched state. "Would you like some dry clothes? My ex-wife left some things that might fit you." Daniel immediately regretted the offer, both because it sounded strange and because mentioning Catherine made his chest tighten unexpectedly. "No, thank you," Alice said. "I'll dry off soon enough. But I would love that phone charger if you have one." Daniel found a universal charger in his office drawer and brought it to her. She pulled out a sleek black phone from her coat pocket, but when she connected it, nothing happened. "The power," she remembered, laughing softly. "I forgot." "Right," Daniel said, feeling foolish. "Sorry, I have a portable battery somewhere, but I'm not sure if it's charged." "It's fine." She waved away his concern. "I can wait. The host isn't expecting me until tomorrow anyway. I came a day early to—" Her voice trailed off. "Well, it doesn't matter now." An awkward silence fell between them, filled by the sound of rain and distant thunder. Daniel realized he was staring and averted his eyes. "Would you like some wine?" he offered. "I was just having dinner when you knocked." "Just water, please. I don't drink alcohol." He led her to the kitchen, where the candles created dancing shadows on the walls. As he filled a glass with water from a pitcher in the refrigerator, he watched her take in his home, the framed photos of Emma and Noah on the wall, the finger paintings magnetized to the refrigerator, the calendar with custody dates circled in red marker. "Your children?" she asked, nodding toward a photo of the kids at the beach last summer. "Yes, Emma's 8, Noah's 6. Daniel handed her the water. "They're with their mother this weekend." Alice nodded, but didn't ask the obvious follow-up questions about his divorce or his relationship with his ex-wife. Instead, she said, "You have a beautiful home." "Thanks. I've been here 8 years now." He was suddenly conscious of the house's disarray, not messy exactly, but bearing the unmistakable signs of a single father trying to maintain the infrastructure of a family home alone. Mail piled on the counter, a basket of unfolded laundry on the dining room chair, dishes in the sink that he'd promised himself he'd wash before bed. "Please sit down," he said, gesturing to the living room. "I can call a cab service for you when the storm lets up a bit, or you're welcome to wait here until morning if you'd prefer. I have a guest room." "I should try to get to my actual rental," Alice said, but made no move toward the door. Instead, she sat on the edge of the couch, her posture unnaturally straight. "Once the storm passes." Daniel returned to his curry, now cold, and sat in the armchair across from her. "So what brings you to the area? Vacation?" "Something like that." She ran a finger along the rim of her water glass but didn't drink. "I needed to get away for a bit, clear my head." "I understand that," Daniel said, meaning it. They talked for nearly 20 minutes, though later, Daniel would struggle to recall the specifics of their conversation. Alice asked questions about his work as a landscape architect, about the area, about how long the power typically stayed out during storms. She answered his questions with vague generalities. She worked in finance, lived just outside Chicago, was single with no children. Her voice was soft, requiring him to lean forward to catch her words over the rain, yet there was a precision to her speech that suggested each response was carefully measured. She didn't eat or drink anything, not even the water she'd requested. Didn't remove her raincoat, though it was clearly uncomfortable. Didn't share any personal stories or jokes. In the candlelight, her face remained partially shadowed, her expressions muted. Around 10 p.m. the storm began to subside, the thunder growing more distant, the rain softening from violent downpour to steady patter. "I should go," Alice said, abruptly standing. "The worst seems to have passed. Are you sure it's still pretty bad out there and it's late? The guest room offer stands." "You've been very kind, but I've imposed enough." She moved toward the door. "Could you possibly call that cab for me now?" Daniel took out his phone, but the rideshare app showed no available drivers in the area. "It might be a while," he warned her. "I could drive you to your rental if you'd like." Even as he made the offer, a part of him wondered if it was wise to spend more time with this strange, reserved woman. "No need," she said quickly. "I'll manage. Thank you again for your hospitality." Before he could insist further, she was out the door, disappearing into the remnants of the storm. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching her retreating figure until it vanished into the darkness beyond his porch light. He hadn't even seen if she had a car parked nearby. The power flickered back on 20 minutes later, the sudden flood of light making the house seem harsh and overexposed after the gentle candlelight. Daniel blew out the candles and went through the motions of cleaning up, his mind still on his strange visitor. There had been something off about the entire encounter, though he couldn't pinpoint what exactly. Something in her manner, in the careful way she'd observed his home, in how little she'd revealed about herself. It wasn't until the next morning, as he was collecting his keys and wallet to meet a friend for breakfast, that he noticed it. Alice's travel bag, still sitting by the front door, where she'd placed it when she arrived. In her hurry to leave, she'd forgotten it. Daniel picked up the bag, lightweight with a simple zipper closure, no identification tag. He hesitated before opening it, feeling like he was violating her privacy, but reasoned that he needed to find some contact information to return it. Inside were not the toiletries or clothing he expected, but a pair of worn ballet flats and a folded piece of paper. Nothing else, no wallet, no phone charger, no change of clothes. He unfolded the paper, revealing a series of numbers that he recognized as coordinates. No name, no note, just the precise geographical location written in neat, tight handwriting. Daniel entered the coordinates into his phone's map application. They pointed to a location about an hour outside the city, a wooded area near a lake. He zoomed in, expecting to see a cabin or vacation rental, but there appeared to be nothing there, just forest and the edge of water. Curiosity gnawed at him throughout breakfast with his friend Mark. He mentioned the strange visitor, describing the encounter as they ate their omelets. So, a mysterious woman shows up at your door in a storm, barely tells you anything about herself, then disappears, leaving only cryptic coordinates? Mark raised his eyebrows. That's either the beginning of an elaborate scam or the plot of a psychological thriller. She didn't ask for money or anything, Daniel pointed out. She barely accepted basic hospitality. Maybe she's planning to come back, casing your house. But Mark's tone was light, teasing. Or maybe she's your mysterious guardian angel, appearing when you're at your lowest point post-divorce. Daniel forced a laugh, but something about Mark's joke unsettled him. Had he seemed that pathetic, that in need of saving? After breakfast, instead of going home, Daniel found himself driving toward the coordinates from Alice's note. He wasn't entirely sure what compelled him, concern for her, curiosity, or simply the need for a distraction from his empty house. But an hour later, he was turning onto a gravel road that wound through dense forest. The map directed him to a spot where the road ended abruptly at a locked gate. Beyond it, a narrow path continued toward what his map indicated was the lakeshore, but there was no cabin, no structure of any kind visible through the trees. Just wilderness, quiet and indifferent, swaying slightly in the aftermath of the storm. Daniel got out of his car, approaching the gate. A small sign warned, "Private property, no trespassing." The padlock on the gate was new, recently installed. He stood there for several minutes, uncertain what he'd expected to find. The coordinates had led him to nothing, a locked gate and empty forest. Whatever Alice had been looking for, it wasn't here. Or if it was, it wasn't accessible to him. Back at home, Daniel searched online for Airbnb listings in the area from the previous night. There was only one within 10 miles of his house, a renovated farmhouse on Pinecrest Road, hosted by a woman named Meredith. On impulse, he messaged her through the platform. "Did you have a guest named Alice scheduled to arrive last night?" The reply came an hour later. "No guests scheduled until next weekend. Why do you ask?" Daniel stared at the message, a chill spreading through him that had nothing to do with the temperature. He checked the local weather forecast from the previous day. The storm had been predicted, but not until midnight. It had arrived hours earlier than expected. On Monday morning, he mentioned the strange encounter to his co-worker, Jasmine, as they reviewed landscape plans for a new client. "A woman showed up at your door in the middle of nowhere during a power outage." Jasmine's eyebrows shot up. "And she left her bag? You sure she didn't just forget it to have an excuse to come back later?" Daniel hadn't considered that possibility. "Why would she do that?" Jasmine shrugged. "To see you again, to come back when you're not home, I don't know, it's just weird." She hasn't come back, Daniel said. It's been 3 days. But Jasmine's words followed him home that evening. He found himself checking the driveway for unfamiliar cars, peering out windows at unusual sounds, waiting for a knock that didn't come. On Thursday morning, he received an email with no sender name, no subject line. The body contained a single sentence: "Thank you." No signature, no context, no way to reply. Daniel checked the email properties, trying to trace its origin, but the routing information led nowhere useful. He showed it to Mark over lunch, who suggested it was probably just spam with coincidental timing, but Daniel wasn't convinced. Something about the sparse simplicity of it, the lack of any attempt at solicitation, felt personal, intentional. The travel bag remained by his front door for 2 weeks, untouched. Sometimes when he came home from work, he could swear it had been moved slightly, an inch to the left or turned at a different angle, but he told himself it was his imagination, his mind playing tricks fueled by too many late-night thriller movies. Then came another rainy night in early November. Daniel was driving home late after having dinner with Emma and Noah at Catherine's place. The visitation had run long, with bedtime stories and countless hugs, and now he was navigating dark country roads, slick with rain and fallen leaves. His headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness, illuminating the wet asphalt and the dense trees that crowded the roadside. The windshield wipers beat a hypnotic rhythm as he turned onto his road, thoughts still lingering on how Noah had fallen asleep against his shoulder, how Emma had made him promise to come to her science fair next week. That's when his headlights caught a figure standing at the side of the road, about a quarter mile from his driveway. A woman in a dark raincoat holding a small travel bag. She was perfectly still, face turned toward his approaching car, rain streaming down her form. Alice. Daniel's foot instinctively moved to the brake, the car slowing as he approached her. She didn't step toward the road, didn't raise a hand to flag him down, just stood watching his car draw near. He blinked against the brightness of his own headlights reflected in the rain, and she was gone. The roadside was empty, just trees and shadows and falling water. Daniel pulled over, heart hammering. He rolled down his window, peering out into the rain. "Alice?" he called, feeling foolish even as he did so. No response but the patter of raindrops and distant thunder. He drove the rest of the way home slowly, eyes scanning the darkness, seeing shapes in every shadow that dissolved upon closer inspection. The house was exactly as he'd left it, dark and quiet. He unlocked the door with shaking hands, switching on lights as he entered, chasing away the shadows. The travel bag was gone from its place by the door. Daniel stood in his entryway, water dripping from his coat onto the tiles, staring at the empty space where the bag had sat for 2 weeks. He checked the closet, the kitchen counter, the guest room, anywhere he might have moved it and forgotten. Nothing. He sank onto the couch, the material cold against his back, and listened to the rain against the windows, trying to convince himself there was a logical explanation. He had moved the bag without remembering, or thrown it away during weekend cleaning, or Catherine had taken it thinking it belonged to her, or a sound from the kitchen made him freeze. The soft clink of glass against countertop, as if someone had set down a water glass. Then silence. "Hello?" Daniel called, rising slowly from the couch. "Is someone there?" No answer. He moved cautiously toward the kitchen, phone in hand, ready to call 911. The room was empty, but on the counter sat a glass of water, full, untouched, exactly where Alice had left her glass that night. Someone else's memories. Jo Winters didn't believe in omens, but if she did, the relentless Friday rain would have qualified. It drummed against the windows of the co-living apartment she shared with 3 roommates, turning the afternoon prematurely dark. The kind of weather that made people see shapes in shadows, that blurred the line between imagination and perception. Jo, however, prided herself on her clarity. As a tech consultant who specialized in debugging complex systems, she dealt in facts, logic, and verifiable patterns, not superstition or unfounded anxiety. She'd just returned from meeting a client when she noticed the manila envelope on the floor by the mail slot. It was addressed to current resident Apton 4B, not unusual for junk mail, but there was no stamp, no postmark, No return address. Someone had hand-delivered it. Jo picked it up, turning it over in her hands. The paper was high quality, heavyweight, with her address written in neat block letters. Not the handwriting of any of her roommates as far as she could tell. She sliced it open with her house key and tipped the contents into her palm. 5 Polaroid photographs slid out. The first showed the apartment kitchen at night, the overhead light creating harsh shadows, the image slightly out of focus as if taken by an unsteady hand. The second captured the hallway leading to the bedrooms, the perspective suggesting the photographer was standing near the front door. The third was a close-up of the living room window, raindrops visible on the glass, the streetlight outside, creating an eerie glow. The fourth showed the bathroom, empty except for a towel hanging crookedly on the rack. Maya's towel, the blue one with the frayed edge. The fifth photograph made Jo's breath catch. It showed someone asleep on their living room couch, curled under the grey throw blanket they kept draped over the armrest. The angle suggested the photographer was standing in the entryway between the living room and kitchen. The sleeping figure's face wasn't visible, just the curve of a shoulder and dark hair splayed across the cushion. Jo studied the image, trying to identify which of her roommates it might be. Reed had dark hair, but he rarely napped on the couch. Maya was blonde. Zach had short curly hair that wouldn't splay out like that. It could be a friend or guest of one of her roommates, but something about the intimate nature of the photograph, someone sleeping unaware they were being watched, made her skin prickle. The sound of the front door opening made Jo jump. She quickly slid the photos back into the envelope as Reed walked in, shaking water from his umbrella. "This rain is apocalyptic," he complained, kicking off his shoes. "I had to wade through a literal river to cross Lexington Avenue." He noticed the envelope in Jo's hands. "What's that? Did we get served or something?" "No, it's just some mail." Jo wasn't sure why she hesitated to tell him about the photos. Maybe because she hadn't fully processed them herself, or maybe because there was something unsettling about them that she couldn't quite articulate. "Marketing stuff, I think." Reed shrugged, heading to the kitchen. "Hey, did you eat the last of the hummus? I was saving it for my lunch tomorrow." "Wasn't me," Jo replied, grateful for the subject change. "Ask Zach. I saw him rooting around in the fridge last night." Later that evening, when all her roommates had gathered in the apartment, Jo brought out the envelope. They sat around their small dining table as she spread the Polaroids out. "These were in our mail today," she explained. "No return address, no note." Maya picked up the photo of the bathroom. "That's my towel. When was this taken?" "And that's definitely our kitchen," Zach added, examining another photo. "But who would take pictures of our apartment and send them to us? Some kind of weird prank?" Reed was studying the photo of the sleeping figure. "Is this supposed to be one of us? I can't even tell who it is." "That's what's bothering me," Jo said. "These were taken inside our apartment recently. That means someone was in here taking photos while at least one of us was asleep and none of us noticed." The implications hung in the air between them. Their apartment was on the 4th floor of a secure building. You needed a key fob to enter the main door, and their apartment had 2 deadbolts. "Could it be the super?" Maya suggested. "He has a key. Why would he take Polaroids of our place and then anonymously send them to us?" Zach countered. "That makes no sense." "Maybe one of us took them?" Reed looked around the table. "Like sleepwalking or something, and then forgot about it." "Do any of you even own a Polaroid camera?" Jo asked. They all shook their heads. "Then how do you explain these?" Jo tapped the photographs. "Someone took these images inside our apartment. Recently, that's a fact." No one had an answer. That night, Jo had trouble sleeping. The rain continued its steady rhythm against her bedroom window, a sound that normally soothed her, but now seemed to be masking other, subtler noises in the apartment. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator cycling on or off made her tense. She checked both deadbolts twice before going to bed, even jammed a chair under her bedroom doorknob, a gesture that had made her feel simultaneously ridiculous and justified. In the morning, the sky was clear, the rain finally exhausted. Jo woke early and made coffee in the kitchen, the normality of the routine calming her nerves. The envelope with the Polaroid sat on the counter where they'd left it. In the harsh light of day, the photos seemed less menacing, more like a stupid prank or misunderstanding. She opened the microwave to heat her coffee and paused. The microwave clock was flashing 12 hours, indicating the power had gone out at some point during the night. But there had been no storm, no thunder that would have disrupted the electricity. Jo checked her phone. 7:23 a.m. She reset the microwave clock, a small frown creasing her forehead. As she did so, she noticed something else. A chair at the dining table was pulled out at an odd angle, not where they'd left it after their discussion last night. She distinctly remembered pushing all the chairs in before going to bed, a habit her mother had instilled in her. A coincidence, she told herself. One of her roommates must have gotten up during the night and moved it. The power outage was probably just a brief surge, common in old buildings like theirs. But as she moved through her morning routine, Jo noticed other small inconsistencies. The cereal boxes were arranged differently in the cabinet, organized by height rather than type. The dish towel was folded into a precise triangle rather than hung on its hook. Her umbrella, which she always left by the front door, was now in the coat closet. None of these things were significant on their own. Any one of them could be explained by the actions of her roommates, all of whom had different habits and preferences. But collectively they created a sense of wrongness, as if the apartment had been subtly rearranged while she slept. Jo said nothing to the others as they each left for work. Instead, she took out her phone and began systematically photographing the apartment, the kitchen counter, the living room furniture arrangement, the position of items on the bookshelves, even the order of bottles in the shower caddy. If things continued to change, she would have documentation, evidence. That evening, she compared her morning photos to the current state of the apartment. Most things were as she'd left them, but there were differences. A coffee mug on the counter. That hadn't been there when she left. A book removed from the shelf, the living room lamp switched on though no one was home yet. Jo was staring at this last discrepancy when Maya walked in. "Oh good, you turned on a light," Maya said, dropping her dance bag by the door. "I hate coming home to a dark apartment." Jo looked at her sharply. "I didn't turn it on. I thought..." "You must have left it on this morning." Maya shook her head. "I left before sunrise for my early class. All the lights were off." "Then who turned it on?" Maya shrugged. "Maybe the timer. Isn't there a timer on that lamp?" "No," Jo said firmly. "There's no timer." For the next few days, Jo documented the apartment obsessively, comparing her photos each evening, noting every minor change. Some could be attributed to her roommates, but others defied explanation. Objects moved to places no one admitted putting them, lights turned on or off, the television switched to channels no one had been watching. "You're being paranoid," Zach told her when she pointed out that his PlayStation controller was on the wrong side of the coffee table from where he always left it. "You're looking for patterns where there are just random variations." "I'm a systems analyst," Jo countered. "Finding patterns is literally my job, and something is definitely off here." "It's those weird photos," Reed suggested. "They've got you spooked." Maybe he was right. Maybe the Polaroids had triggered some kind of hypervigilance in her, making her notice normal fluctuations that had always been there. But Jo couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in their apartment, that some invisible boundary had been crossed. That night she dreamed she was walking through their apartment in darkness. In the dream she moved with purpose, though she didn't know why. She stopped in the kitchen and took something from a drawer, she couldn't see what. Then moved to the living room where she stood perfectly still for a long time, looking at something she couldn't quite make out. Then she raised her hands, and there was a brief flash of light. Jo woke with a start, her heart racing. The dream had been so vivid, so specific, unlike her usual fragmented dreams that dissolved upon waking. This one stuck with her, the details sharp and persistent. It wasn't until she was making breakfast that she realized why the dream had disturbed her so much. The flash of light at the end, like a camera flash, like a Polaroid being taken. She pulled out the envelope of photos and studied the image of the kitchen again. The angle, the perspective. It matched exactly what she'd seen in her dream, as if she herself had been standing there, taking the photo. "That's not possible," Joe muttered, shoving the photos back into the envelope. She'd never sleepwalked in her life. She'd never owned a Polaroid camera. The idea that she could have taken these photos herself, then forgotten about it, was absurd. And yet the dream lingered, casting doubt on her certainty. That evening, when all 4 roommates were home, Jo found herself struggling to recall basic details about the day. Had she locked the door when she came in? Had she put her keys in the bowl by the entry or in her jacket pocket? What had she eaten for lunch? The gaps in her memory were small but disconcerting, like static interrupting an otherwise clear radio signal. She began making notes on her phone, not just about the apartment's state, but about her own actions and movements. Where she went, what she did, who she talked to, anchoring herself in documented reality. But the notes themselves began to confuse her. There were entries she didn't remember writing, observations she didn't recall making. Kitchen light flickering at 2:17 a.m. Bulb needs changing. Someone breathing in the hallway at 3:22 a.m. Reed getting water? Shadow moved across living room wall at 4:05 a.m. Headlights from street? All time-stamped during hours she was certain she'd been asleep. I think I need to get a camera, Jo told Maya one morning as they both rushed to get ready for work, to monitor the apartment while we're out. Because of those weird photos? Maya asked, applying mascara with practiced precision. It's been over a week, Jo. Nothing's happened. It was probably just a stupid prank. It's not just the photos, Jo insisted. Things keep moving around. Haven't you noticed? Maya paused, mascara wand hovering. Like what? The coffee mugs were rearranged. Again. The throw pillows on the couch were on opposite ends from where they were yesterday. The bathroom hand towel was damp this morning, but no one showered. Jo, we have 4 people living in this apartment. Things move around. We use objects and put them back in slightly different places. That's normal. But look, Maya said, her voice gentler now. I know you've been stressed about that big project at work. Maybe you're just noticing things more than usual? Sometimes when I'm choreographing a new piece, I get like that too. Hyper-aware of every little detail, seeing patterns everywhere. Jo wanted to believe her, wanted to accept the logical explanation that she was simply on edge, projecting her anxieties onto ordinary household fluctuations. But that didn't explain the Polaroids or her dream. That night, unable to sleep, Jo sat in the dark living room, listening to the sounds of the apartment, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the distant drone of traffic, the occasional creak of the building settling. Every sound accounted for, categorized, explained, until she heard a faint click from the direction of the front door. Jo froze, straining to identify the noise. It had been subtle, could have been anything. The building's old pipes, a neighbor's door. But it had sounded distinctly like a key turning in a lock. She waited, barely breathing, for several minutes. Nothing followed. No door opening, no footsteps, no further sounds out of place. Eventually, she convinced herself it had been her imagination and returned to bed. The next morning, she finally did what she'd been avoiding. She confronted her roommates directly. I need to ask you all something, she said as they gathered around the breakfast table, a rare occurrence dictated by their varied schedules. And I need you to be completely honest with me. Zach looked up from his phone. Reed paused with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth, and Maya set down her granola spoon. Has anyone noticed anything strange happening in the apartment? Anything at all? Reed and Zach exchanged glances. Define strange, Reed said cautiously. Things moving that you didn't move. Sounds you can't explain. Gaps in your memory. Anything that feels off. Maya sighed. Jo, we've been over this. Actually, Reed interrupted, there was something. He hesitated, looking embarrassed. A couple of weeks ago, I thought I saw you standing in the hallway in the middle of the night, Jo. Just standing there, looking toward the living room. I said your name, but you didn't respond. I figured you were sleepwalking or something. Jo felt a chill run through her. When was this exactly? I don't know, maybe 3 weeks ago. It was raining really hard that night. I've never sleepwalked in my life, Jo said firmly. And I've been having weird dreams, Maya admitted, about being in the apartment, but it's not quite right. The layout is different, or there are rooms that don't exist. Zach was staring at his coffee. I woke up on the couch last week with no memory of how I got there. I assumed I just fell. Asleep watching TV, but the TV wasn't on. Jo felt a mix of validation and dread. She wasn't imagining things. Something was happening to all of them. "We need to figure this out," she said. The Polaroids, the moving objects, the memory gaps, they're all connected somehow. Connected to what? Reed asked, skepticism edging his voice despite his own admission. Before Jo could answer, there was a knock at the door. They all turned to look, none of them expecting visitors so early. Jo approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. A delivery person stood in the hallway, holding another manila envelope. "Delivery for 4B, they announced when Jo opened the door. She signed for the envelope and brought it back to the table. It was identical to the one that had contained the Polaroids. Same heavy paper, same handwritten address, no return information. Jo opened it carefully. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled it out and placed it on the table for everyone to see. The photo showed the four of them, Jo, Reed, Maya, and Zach, sitting around their dining table, looking at something outside the frame. Their expressions were intent, focused. It appeared to have been taken recently. They were all wearing clothes they recognized from the past week. "I don't understand," Maya whispered. "Who took this? When?" Jo was staring not at their faces, in the photo, but at something else. The reflection visible in the window behind them. A dark shape, holding what appeared to be a camera. A person. But the reflection was distorted, the features impossible to make out clearly. It could have been anyone, or any one of them. "We need to talk," Jo said finally, looking up at her roommates. "About what's been happening, about what we might be doing without realizing it." "What are you saying?" Zach asked, his voice tight with tension. "I'm saying," Jo replied slowly, "that I think we might be the ones taking these photos. I think we might be doing things we don't remember. And I think we need to figure out why before it gets worse." The rain had started again outside, a gentle patter against the windows. In the reflection of the glass, Jo could see all four of them sitting around the table, the new Polaroid between them. For a moment, just a split second, she thought she saw a fifth figure standing behind them, watching. But when she turned to look, there was only empty space. She turned back to the window, the figure was gone, or perhaps had never been there at all. If this story kept you watching until the end, like the video and subscribe. The next one might be waiting for you right now. And there's one more, waiting just over there. Maybe it explains what was missing in this one. Maybe it makes everything worse.